Hello, this is Camry Ingman from Camry Ingman Photography. I've never done an editing video before, so this might be a little bit choppy, but bear with me. I'm going to try to go through all the steps and show you how I made this composite. So the very first thing I did before I even got my kids together to take this picture is I had to plan my session out. I knew that I wanted to use this background that I got from Finding North. If you're not familiar with Finding North, they're a subscription-based website. They have lots of content, editing tutorials, they have actions, even some presets. They have lots of overlays and backgrounds that you can save and use in your composites and stuff. That's actually where I learned how to do a composite. So if you haven't seen them or heard of them yet, I suggest you look up Finding North. They have a monthly, bi-monthly, and a yearly subscription that you can sign up for, and just amazing content. Their videos are just wonderful. So I got this background from Finding North probably a year ago that I've been excited to use, and I just haven't had anything that I wanted to use it for. So when I saw this trend going around with the with the kids stacked on each other's shoulders, I knew that I wanted to try it with my 4 kids, and I thought this background would be perfect. So if you're not going to use a background that you're photoshopping your subjects onto, go ahead and shoot whenever, wherever you feel like works best for you. But because I knew I wanted to use this background, I had to plan my photo shoot around the lighting scenario in this picture to make sure that it matched. This background has a very balanced light. There's not a lot of light spots and shadows. So I wanted to shoot my kids during a time that was overcast, and I wanted there to be snow on the ground so that it'd be a lot easier to Photoshop my oldest at the bottom's feet into this background without it looking like he's hovering over the ground. So when it was snowing and it was overcast and foggy the other day, I grabbed my kids and ran out because I had been waiting for the perfect storm, if you will, of lighting and weather so that I could make this composite look realistic. So when the weather was right and the light was right, I grabbed my kids and we went outside, and the first thing I did was set up a tripod. I wanted to use a tripod so that when I was taking each individual kid's picture, they were all the same angle, everything was lined up. If I had the camera moving too much, then the angles just wouldn't line up and it just wouldn't look good. So for the first picture, I had my oldest, since he would be at the bottom, stand up straight. I wanted a picture of him up straight. I wanted his feet in the snow, and I had him hold his hands up like he was holding his brother's feet because I wanted his shoulders and his arms to be as close to what the next picture would be to make photoshopping later easier. And I didn't have his brother on his shoulders yet, because when they were on each other's shoulders, they were kind of squirming and making faces because they were all kind of heavy and they were falling, and it was a mess. So I got a picture of his face as he's standing here smiling. He looks relaxed and great. Then in the next picture, I helped his brother get on his shoulders, and then I held his back to keep him upright so he wasn't falling backwards or leaning forward, and then I had him hold his arms up, again, so that his body was in as close to a similar position, especially his shoulders and his torso, as they would be when his brother was put on his shoulders. So then in the next picture, I have my second son sitting so that his legs more similarly match how they would be when he was on his brother's shoulders before. And what I didn't think to do here that I wish I had was his legs are kind of knees in together. I wish I had had him open his legs a little more to more similarly mimic what they would be like if his brother's head and neck were in between his legs. So when you do this, maybe have your kids split their legs apart a little bit more. It'll definitely help in the editing process. So then the next picture I have the third kid on his brother's shoulders, and I'm again helping him. So for the first picture that I was in over here helping my kids, I had my 4-year-old go, and I had the camera all set up ready to go. All he had to do was click the button to take the picture for me. And then in these pictures where I'm helping the little brothers, I had my 7-year-old go over and work the camera for me. So you can see I just had him, I held him up here to get him how I wanted him, and then I moved to the side to make it a lot easier to Photoshop me out of it later. And then here I have the baby, which I took more of the baby because this one, you can see I'm holding his arm because I wanted his hands to look like he's holding his brother's head. And then here he's sitting up and I wanted you to be able to see his face. And here I'm pushing his back all the way up so his shoulders are up where I want them. So I took probably about 150, 160 pictures of my kids to make sure that I could get all the details that I needed to make the composite look as realistic as possible. So what I did to separate the ones that I was keeping and the ones that I wasn't going to use is, so let's get rid of these. So I went through all the pictures, and the pictures that I wanted to keep, I labeled them in yellow. So I just hit number 7 and the picture is yellow. You can also hit number 6 for red, 8 for green, 9 for blue, and then there is a purple color label, but I don't know of a number that you can hit to create that. So you can also just right click and go to set color label and hit the color labels here. And the reason that I like to do that is to keep them separated into different categories so I don't have to search through 160 pictures to find the ones that I'm using. So the ones that I'm using I labeled yellow. The ones that I think I might need, but I don't want them up front until I'm sure I need them, I labeled blue. And then I left everything else the same. These green labels are the ones that are final images. That way, if I'm trying to find final images that are edited, I can just ask it to show only green. If I'm looking for pictures that I need donor pieces from, I call these my donor images because I take donor parts from them. Then I can click on just the blue, or if I want just the pictures that I'm planning on using for this composite, and they're just right here. Makes it a lot easier for me to keep it all straight. So after I cull through all my pictures and I have them labeled by color, I don't delete any of the images until I'm completely done with the composite in case I need to go looking for more donor pieces, which in this I actually did. I got to the end and realized that the baby's hands were back and it just didn't look like he would be able to hold himself up that way. So I actually had to go through and find a picture where his hands were kind of on his brother's head, and I actually threw that in towards the very end. So I never delete any of these pictures until I know that I am completely done with all the pieces. So I take all of my pictures that I think I'm going to use donor parts from, right click, edit in, and I send them to Photoshop. So now that I have all of my pictures imported into Photoshop, I'm going to begin working on my composite. So I'm going to start with this image first since he's on the bottom. It just makes sense to me to work my way up. So the first thing that I'm going to do is unlock the background, hitting this lock right there. And I'm going to go to File and hit Place Embedded. I'm going to go to where my backdrop is saved from Finding North and hit Place. And that'll just take a minute to appear. So you want to make sure that it is selected. It looks like this. If these boxes are not there, you can hit Control T or Command T on a Mac and these will appear. There is a keyboard shortcut I know that you can push that will make this image automatically fill up the whole canvas, but I don't remember it right now. So I'm just going to manually drag it and then hit Enter when I'm done. Now I'm going to drag layer 0 and move it to the top and hit my magic wand. It's called magic wand tool, yes, and select subject. Now you can hit select and mask and it'll take you to another screen where you can mask on and off whatever it missed in its selection, or if it selected something you didn't want selected, you could mask that on and off. I prefer to just do select subject and then I go to this right here, this rectangle with a circle, and create a layer mask. So now I'm going to take my subject, and I'm actually going to move him forward a little bit, because if you see in this picture, the what's it called? The focal point is closer up here, and as the focus falls back, it gets more and more blurry. I want him to look like he's in the same focus spot as this background. So I'm going to put him right about here, so that this is tack sharp, like this is tack sharp. If he's standing back here where it's blurry, it just doesn't look right. So the next thing to do is to zoom in on him, and you can see that the selection wand did a pretty decent job of selecting him, but it definitely missed some spots. And you see, like, around his coat here's really jagged. It left a spot on his elbow. Right here's all cut out. It's pretty good. It saves you a lot of time to use that tool, but it is not as accurate as doing it manually. So I want to hit B for brush and make sure that my brush is selected. And then what you want to do is click on this to make sure that you have absolute white and absolute black. Anything that you paint black is going to disappear, and anything that you paint with the white brush is going to reappear. So go back to how it was. So if you use not an absolute white or not an absolute black, it's going to act as an opaque brush, and it will still paint things on and off, but it's going to be opaque. So it'll either paint mostly off or paint mostly on, depending on what you're trying to do. So with a black brush, I'm going to take out this little spot. I'm going to zoom in on my kid. I'm going to get a smaller brush. And then I want 100% opacity, and I want a pretty sharp brush, but I don't want it to be too sharp because it just doesn't look realistic. You want a little bit of a softness to it. So I'm going to hit X to turn it back to white. Right here, I want the white one to be selected. And then I'm going to very, very carefully paint in where it missed on his coat. And if I paint in too much, not a problem. Gonna hit X and it'll go back to the black. And I will paint out what I don't want. And you can play with the brush a little bit. You might want it more or less feathered. You might want a bigger brush or a smaller brush at different points. So this is where it gets really painstaking and time consuming. Not hard, just a lot of time. So maybe make my brush a little smaller. Come right here around his hat where the selection wand selected more than what it should have, and just carefully with my brush paint out what I don't want. Go back to white, try to paint his collar back in a little bit. Get back out. So I'm not going to do it super well for this because I don't want you to sit and watch a 5-hour video. But just for the sake of understanding what I do, I just go back and forth hitting X between the white brush and the black brush, and I paint on and off what I want or what I don't want to keep. And then I'll go around his entire body and touch up all these little things. So again, this is where it just gets really time consuming, but it's not hard, just time consuming. So for the sake of moving forward, we'll just pretend that I have him all cut out the way I want, that I've gone through all these little pieces and, taken this out and added this in, made everything look realistic, patched everything that the selection tool missed. Then I'm gonna leave this with its mask because I might need to mask more on or off later. Then I'm going to go to my next picture, and using my selection wand, where are you? My lasso, not my lasso, I'm going to lasso him. Now I always take more than what I need because I can always mask it out, but if I don't take, say I miss his arm and then I end up wanting it, I can't mask that back later. So I'm going to Control C or Command C, on a Mac, and Control V, Command V, either one, and I get him. Now, when I took this picture, my 4-year-old actually took this picture for me so that I could help my 6-year-old be on the 7-year-old's shoulders, and being a 4-year-old, he did bump the tripod, so it did move. So these two are bigger than what they should be. So I'm going to hit Control T, and I'm going to make him a little bit smaller. I'm going to make this opaque, this top layer opaque, so that I can see where I'm moving it in correspondence to the bottom picture. So what I like to do is find something that's in both pictures that I can use as an accurate measurement of size as well as location of the top image to the bottom image. So I'm going to take this pocket right here and this little lapel, I don't know if it's a lapel, comes off the lapel. And I want these to line up. When these line up, I know that they're the right size since my son did move the camera, and so they're not the correct size to begin with. So I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, and then I'm going to try to line up this pocket. It's lined up pretty good, but this right here on the lapel doesn't match up, so I know it's still too big. So I'm going to make it just a tiny bit smaller. Line my pocket back up. It's getting closer to the accurate size that it should be. And line it up again. We're getting real close. So there, that's pretty good. So you can see now. Another thing, if I'm doing head swaps, is I like to line up the eyes or the mouth or the ears or something. This little patch here, if they were looking the same way, would be an excellent thing to line up to make sure that the size and everything's correct, the placement. So now that I think I have it where I want it, I'm going to move the opacity back up to 100. And that doesn't look too bad. So making sure I'm still selecting my top layer, I'm going to do just what we did before. And I'm going to select subject again. This time I'm going to select the kid on top. And so it's going to take the background away for me like we did before. Select subject. Okay, did a pretty good job of selecting him. Obviously not perfect. So I'm going to go back down here to this rectangle with the circle and make a new layer mask. And that looks pretty darn good. Obviously, it's going to need a lot of touch-ups. You can see around his shoulders here, his coat here. Definitely, I'm going to need to do some touch-ups around his boot here. So I'm going to make sure I'm on the layer mask, and I'm going to go to B again, get my brush out, and I want to take this off. But I want to do it really subtly so there's a transition. If I do just a harsh line, it's just not going to look good because this just doesn't add up perfectly. His coat moved. It was a different picture, so he just couldn't stand perfectly straight. So go back to my brush, B for brush, and I'm actually going to change the opacity. Now to change the opacity, you can either just key in the number that you want, or you can click on it and toggle this back and forth. I know I want it around 23%. I want a little bit of a bigger brush, maybe about there. And I want the hardness to be somewhere around the 20s as well. And the reason I want it opaque is because as I brush over it, it's going to create a more subtle transition between the two layers of his coat. And because it's such a feathered brush, it is going to take off things like his boot here. And I'm okay with that. I will paint that in later. So now I just want to carefully go around his coat, and I want to just take out pieces of the top layer until it looks pretty seamless. And if I think I've taken too much, I can hit X and go to the white, and I can add some back in. Maybe make the brush smaller here. Take some more of that in. And so if I were doing this for my actual composite, I would be a lot more careful. But for the sake of the video, I think that looks decent to illustrate the point. Maybe touch this up a little bit. Okay, so now staying on B for brush. See, I want to paint some of this shoe back in, but if I leave it at where it's at, it's going to take a long time and it's not going to look good because it's so feathered. So I'm going to type in 100 to bring the opacity back up to 100, and I'm going to bring the hardness somewhere around high 70s, low 80s, I think would be good. Make the brush a little bit smaller, and then I'm just going to carefully brush his shoe back in. I want to get some of the snow over here too. So it's okay if I paint a little bit too much back in. Sometimes I find it easier to paint too much in so I see where the lines are supposed to be, and then I can paint it back out knowing where the lines are going to be. And I don't want to paint out some of the shadowing under his shoe because I want it to look realistic. So hit X to go back to B, and this is a place where I might change the opacity a little bit and maybe feather the brush a little bit more if I want to keep some of this shadow underneath the shoe, but I don't want too much of the old coat because some of the lines and folds don't line up. So that way I keep a little bit of the shadow that's under his boot without making it have folds that just don't line up. So then I'll increase my hardness again because I want to get some of these lines really, really tack sharp. I feel like maybe that's too sharp, so maybe I'll lower it to the 60s, maybe make my brush a little smaller. And you can see it's starting to look like it's really just his shoe. Get rid of some of this around the snow. Okay, so I would go in, for the real composite, I would go in, or did go in, around all these individual little things. You can see this on his shoelace. I would need to go in really carefully with a really small brush and carefully take out these little pieces to make it as realistic as I can. So just like the picture before, I would go around the entire image and just clean it up. Make it look realistic, make sure that the lines look accurate, paint in his shoe. But for the sake of trying to speed this video up, I'm not going to do that right now. It's going to be hard for me to leave it because it looks awful. But you can tell that it's starting to look more realistic. So then I go, let's see, I think I went to this one next. So I want to get him in there. So I would do Control C, select it with my lasso tool, right here, lasso tool, Control C, Control V. So we're going to do just like we did with the other ones. I'm going to go to my magic wand. I'm going to hit select subject. It's going to select him as best as it can. Right here, rectangle with the circle to add a layer mask. And then I'm going to make him slightly opaque. Make sure that I'm on my moving tool. I don't know what it's called. Move tool. It's actually called the move tool. Okay. And I can see, line these squares up. I can see that they're about the same size. His glasses seem to be about the same size. So I know that they are appropriate proportions. They're proportionate to each other. Maybe is a better way to say it. So then I would just zoom in here and I'd pay attention to his coat over here by his neck. There's his chin. Try to get it as accurate as possible. Increase the opacity back to normal. B for brush. And then I would start out by taking these big things out, big pieces. And then obviously over here I would need to use the black brush to take him out around there. And this is something that I didn't notice until I was at this stage. As you see that when I took this picture, his boot was cut off. That's something that I should have paid attention to when I was taking the pictures, because that created a little bit more work for me in the editing. So I go through painstakingly, which I'm not doing right now for the sake of time, but I would painstakingly go through and take out everything that I don't want. Obviously here around his arm, it did a terrible job of selecting him, so I would want to go through and carefully paint that with my brush and make it look good. I'm trying not to overdo it to make this video a little bit shorter, but it's hard for me to let go of these little things. Okay, so I would take my brush and painstakingly go through and just, with my white brush and my black brush, add what I need to add and take away what I need to add. What I need to take away. So then with his shoe, where is it? This picture. I actually had to go back to my gallery of pictures that I didn't delete in case I needed more donor pieces, and I'm glad I did that because I ended up needing this boot. So what I did was I took just the boot, Control-C, Control-V to paste, and then just like I've done everything else, selection wand, magic wand, select subject, let it do a lot of the work for me, layer mask, and then you can see now I have what the inside of the boot looks like. So then I took this, B for brush, let's go to our layer mask, and we're going to take out a lot of this extra stuff that I don't actually want. So I would be a lot more careful in my actual composite, but for this tutorial, it's okay to just roughly do it. So then I would lower the opacity so I can see where it goes. This is a great place to line up the tags. Now the angles are different, so it is not going to line up perfectly, but I'm going to try to get it looking as good as possible. Bring the opacity back up. Move it maybe a little bit more so I get that boot where I think it looks good. And then I would go back to my brush and very carefully just paint off all the little details. This might be a good place to lower the opacity and use a very feathered brush so I can go through and just kind of blend his pants I don't want to. It's just an easy way to kind of make it look more realistic. So I'd very carefully just kind of blend it like that. Bring my opacity back up and bring the brush probably about to there, maybe. And so again, this is very crude, but you can see how I've done it. And then I would go to the baby. Where's that baby? So I see right here, I like how his hands are holding him. I think that looks good. See that one, he's sitting up nice. So I would take this one first because I like how he's sitting. Control C, Control V, selection, not selection, magic wand, select subject. By now you're probably a pro at this. Layer mask, and now I have my sweet little baby how I want him. So I would take my baby, I would add him up there, lower the opacity of him so I can see where he should be. It's not a bad place to start. And then, oops, B for brush. Now I don't want this kid, turned sideways. So I'm gonna look for his head here. Might move him down a little bit. Maybe more like that. B for brush. Make sure that it's white because I want to paint back in some of this. Might need to move him a little bit more to get the hat to look right. And this is kind of a painstaking process, but it's really not too hard. Then I would very, very carefully paint him back in here, paint in this baby. And this is where I might go to another picture of the baby and take pieces of his coat if I need to try and help cover this hat. So again, for the sake of speeding this up, I'd move him around till I get him exactly where I want him, and then try to blend in the hat with this hat, which is a good place to use the lower opacity and feathered brush trick. Makes things, it's a lot easier to blend things, so that's not what I wanted to do. So here you can see I can carefully take off pieces of his hat, maybe move the baby a little bit more, and then just using the brush go back and forth until I get all the details exactly where I want them. So at this point I noticed that he looked silly because he clearly wasn't holding onto his brother. So I came back to here and I took just his arm, went back to this image, and I put just his arm here because I wanted it to look like he was holding his hat, but you can see my thumb here is on his shoulder. So I would make this a layer mask, hit the black brush, 100% opacity, probably mid to low 70s, and then very, very carefully, which I'm not going to take the time to do right now, but very carefully I would go around and just paint off all that, and then doing the lower opacity feathered trick here. I would very, very carefully feather in his arm till it blends in with his coat. Control T to get this just the arm because I want to turn it in this way because I want it to look like he's actually holding his brother, and I need it to mesh up with the shoulder. So there you go. And the more time you put into it, the more realistic it's going to look. So, for the sake of this tutorial, there you go. I've got them all on top of each other. I did actually take my second son right here, I took his face from, oh, where is it? It must still be in Lightroom. Okay, I did not get it imported in here. So there, I took the picture of him sitting on a stool, smiling, nobody on his shoulders, nobody bothering him, to get a picture of him smiling. And then same thing like I did with all these, I put it into Photoshop. I took my lasso tool, I took just his face, Control C, Control V, I put it into here. I did, actually I didn't use it on because it was just such a small piece. I just took my brush, B for brush, I pasted it here, lowered the opacity so I could see where it fit, and then I went through, and this actually was also very painstaking, is I had to go through around and I had to cover his hands right here with his coat using the brush, the black brush, white brush, paint things in, paint things out, to make his coat cover his hands here. And then I had to put this kid's new face on him, and then I had to make sure that the coat looked like it was tucked behind his hat, which did take a lot of time and it was very meticulous. But for the sake of this tutorial, here we are. We've got all these boys stacked on each other. So now what I need to do is I need to clean up these arms and his arm back there. So I need to find this layer. I believe it was layer 2. It's not. Layer 1. It's layer 1. So I want to go to layer 1. And I want to hit B. And right here you can see there's tan in there. I don't want any tan. I want solid black and white. True black and white. So I'm going to be on black because I want to take this arm out. And because it's a different layer than this leg and this arm, it'll be a lot easier to take out. So I want to make sure I'm on the mask, not the actual image. And I'm going to take that out. And of course, if I had gone through and meticulously gone around these pieces like I would in an actual edit, then it would look perfect right there. Then I'm going to go to the other side, and I'm going to take this arm out. Super easy. And then I'm going to hit the Remove tool. I know that this arm is the top selection, so I think that the behind arm should be this layer 4. Again, go to B for brush and make sure that I have the black brush selected, and very, very carefully. So I actually want less of a feathered brush for that, so I'm going to increase it, and I can just paint out that back arm until it looks good. Super easy. So now I have my kids all stacked on top of each other. This is where I'm going to collapse all of these different layers of children. So of course, before I do this, I'm going to go around every single line, and I'm going to, that needs to be added, that needs to be taken out, add some there, that doesn't look good. And I'm going to go through and make sure that everything on all these layers looks good, because once I collapse them, it's going to be a lot harder to fix things than it is when they're all separate layers. So once I've decided that they're all exactly how I want them to be, I'm going to click on just these layers and hit Control E. Control Shift E is going to collapse everything that's visible. By visible, that means that this eye has not been toggled. I don't want to collapse everything that's visible, I just want to collapse these layers. So Control E, and it's going to collapse everything that I have selected. So now I have 2 layers. I have the kids, and I have the background. So I'm going to leave it like that for now. And this is where I would go through and edit the kids. So, for example, his yellow front teeth right there, I might whiten those up. I might brighten these eyes. Brown eyes have a tendency sometimes to photograph a little bit dark. So I have a action that I made that actually brightens the eyes, the brown eyes specifically. And I would go through and, you know, if I were keeping his glasses this way, I would take the glare off his glasses, but the picture that I used of his face, he doesn't have glasses, so I'd brighten his eyes. If I wanted to fix his chapped lips, I could. Maybe go through and take the purple out from under his eyes. Just little touches up like that that you want to do. Any skin smoothing, any individual edits, that's also where I would go through. And I cleaned up his coat a little bit. There's a little cut in his coat right there. I believe his sleeve had some stains, so I would just quickly go through and take those stains out and do all that. Once I got it to where I wanted it, then I added the snow overlays. So for the snow overlays, same thing I did when I added the background. I go to File, Place Embedded, and I'll open up the folder where I have my overlays saved. And I don't know why it's freezing. Okay, so these snow overlays are also from Finding North. So once I get my snow overlay imported in, again, that's File, Place Embedded, and then you click on the one that you want to hit place. And it's going to show up just like the first picture the background did. It's going to be selected like this with the X through it. So first thing I want to do is I want to rotate it 90 degrees. And then I'm going to stretch it to fit the screen. And then anytime you use an overlay like this that has a black background, you're going to go to the blending mode here, and you're going to hit screen. And there we go. We have snow. Hit enter to get out of that. I feel like it's just a little bit harsh, so I'm going to go to the opacity, and I'm going to just make it a little bit more subtle. And now some of these snow spots I don't want, like the ones right on their faces. I think the ones on their hats adds a little bit of realism, because if it were snowing, they would have snow on their hats. But I don't like this one right here on his face, or in the original composite I did, one of these was right on his eyeball. I definitely don't want that because I want to be able to see all his features. So I'm going to make a mask out of this. Hit B for brush. Make sure that I'm on black, and then I would go through and I would take out any snowflakes that I don't want. Maybe I think this one's too distracting. Go ahead and take that out. Or this one I think is maybe a little bit too, I feel like your tension goes straight there because it's a little bit too big and dark, so I might take that one out. I might just go over everybody's face to make sure I didn't miss any snowflakes that were on their face. Maybe I don't want that one. And then maybe I just don't think it's enough snow. So I might go to Place Embedded again and pick a different snow overlay. Or if I wanted to add a light overlay, or I don't know, an animal or something, same process. If this is not selected, hit Control T, 90 degrees clockwise. In fact, I'm actually going to go the other way, because I think the more snowflakes should be at the top. So in my actual composite, I did one overlay filling up the whole screen like you just saw, and then for the second overlay, I actually wanted there to be a little bit less snow at the bottom and more snow at the top. So just like before, I'm going to change the blending mode from normal to screen and make it a mask. But instead of taking out individual, well, okay, I'm going to take out the ones on their faces. But then instead of taking out individual snowflakes at the bottom, because I want less at the bottom, I actually went over here, what's it called, to the gradient tool. Made sure that it's on this one. I don't want the circle or any of these for this particular one. Make sure that black is on top. And then I actually made a line going up because I wanted to, instead of just deleting all these snowflakes, I wanted to make a really subtle gradient of the snow getting less and less heavy at the bottom and more heavy at the top. So I could do this If I want it to be even more gradient, I could do that. And you can see over here on the layer mask that it has black and then shades of gray. So the black is going to take the snow all the way out, where the shades of gray, darker gray, will take out a little bit, and the lighter gray will take out even less, and then the white will leave everything. So just like with the brush when we did the opacity to take out smaller amounts of the mask, this is going to do the same thing. So I'm going to click on the background and make sure that I have it exactly as I want it. Before I collapse the snowflakes and the people and the background, I want to make sure that the people and the background are edited just how I want it. So say I wanted the background to be just a little bit darker than my subjects. It's a lot easier to do it while they're still separate layers. So I could go to curves and bring down the curves slightly to help make my kids stand out. Maybe I want to make the kids just a little bit brighter to further make them stand out. I need to make sure that I'm editing just the layer that I want to edit. So on these tools right here, when you use them, you can toggle up and down, and it will affect all of the layers that are below this particular thing. But if you want it to only affect the layer directly beneath it, you would hit this. So the only layer that's underneath this particular one is the background. So I can just leave it like that. But when I want this curves to only edit the people below it, I would have to double click on it and make sure that this has no arrow through it. It's going to affect the entire image, which is not what I want. I want it to only affect the people. So by clicking that, it will now only edit the layer that's directly below it. If I wanted to change the exposure of the children or the color balance, perhaps, I would click this. Maybe I thought the kids were too cold and I wanted to warm them up just a little bit. You can see that this is only warming the kids layer. Obviously that's way too much. Yeah, so once you get it exactly the way you like it and everything's good, then Control-Shift-E to collapse everything. And then I would save this and take it into Lightroom, and then in Lightroom I would do all the little touch-ups that I wanted to do. I would apply my preset, and if I needed to change any other small things like exposure or contrast, anything like that, that's where I would do that in. So here you can see what the final composite looked like after I took the time to go through meticulously around each of the edges, make sure everything lined up. I brought it into Lightroom and I added my preset, and I did the individual little editing tweaks that I do in Lightroom, like contrast and different things like that. On the actual people, I did touch up their faces a little bit, softened their skin, brightened their eyes, you know, touched up the purple underneath their eyes just a little bit, a couple things like that. So this is what the final composite looks like after all the steps that we just went through.